It is official. The Indiana Pacers will not finish 500 this season. Not a surprise given how this season has gone, but still jarring given their expectations this year. But still a lot to watch for the Pacers in the standings. How will the race to the top of the tanking play out? Going to talk about that, where the Pacers could land there. How can they get more draft picks? Who should the Pacers be rooting against all season? Lots to talk about on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name is Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today is either a sad or happy episode, depending on what type of fan you are. This is the first episode since the Pacers officially cannot reach 500. They lost their 42nd game on Monday against the Magic. Their best case scenario is now 40 wins, which means obviously they weren't going to make the playoffs anyway, and I was never going to talk about that. But it is now time to talk about the standings, what the Pacers need to be watching for, what they need to be trying to do, who the other teams they care about are, how it all could shake out the best way for the Pacers, and their three potentially top flight draft picks. And the other reason this is a sad show is I predicted the Pacers would go 41-41 this season. Wow, do I look like an idiot. And joining me to talk about that as well as Chris Duarte's role on this Pacers team, Mr. Jay Rigdon. You might have read him at Awful Announcing and in the Golfers Journal, Northern Indiana's finest resident. Jay, how's it going?
Oh, well, better after that intro, Tony. It's hard to beat that kind of praise. I don't know, but
I'm going to have some Northern Indiana listeners who are not happy with that.
Completely, and that's understandable. But I didn't ask for it for anyone who would question that. That's all Tony. I can't claim that kind of title myself. I'm pretty good though. I'm up there.
Yeah, Indy had good weather today. I think a lot of people in Indiana are in a pretty good mood. He was not in a good mood is Rick Carlisle because his team has 42 losses now. They got smoked by the Magic the other night, which officially put them over the edge. And look, the obvious thing I think people understand is that losing is good for this Pacers team. Obviously, they want to bank some wins and figure out how they win with their current core. There is the right balance of not just throwing away all these games. Everybody realizes, though, that the inverse standings are what this team is looking at. And a team like Orlando, who just beat them, has 15 wins. There are three teams with 15 wins, and OKC's got 19, and then it's the Pacers there at 5. So the standings are really mucked up near the bottom. There's also the Cavs pick at play. They have 36 wins. There's a bunch of teams. 4 teams have 36 wins right now. The standings are crazy, and the Pacers have a lot to watch for. But, Jay, when you look at the inverse standings, with those terrible teams up at the top, OKC and Orlando both just beat the Pacers, where do you kind of feel like the Pacers' kind of likely range of outcomes is in terms of how high they can get in that lottery standing?
Yeah, I think I would say it's hard to believe they're going to get up into the top 3, right? Like that seems pretty unlikely. Those other teams are actively trying harder than the Pacers are to lose. But I think right around that 4, 5, 6 range feels really plausible right now. And that's a pretty solid spot to be for the Pacers, especially considering they kind of went into the season not expecting to be up there. And they've sort of done kind of the accidental tank so far. And especially it's been quite something to watch, quite the turnaround. And so, yeah, I think probably 4 to 6 is where I would slot him in right now. I don't know where you have him at, but.
Yeah, that seems right to me. I've kind of talked about how the trade deadline lowered the floor of how low they could go, but kind of raised it's going to be harder for them to get up really high. So the thing about the tank standings, the inverse standings, whatever phrase people use, I think the website Tankathon has just made tank standings people's phrasing. It's kind of convenient that we're doing this, that the Pacers are 21-42. That is exactly 1/3 wins, right? They win 1 out of 3 games this season. Which, by the way, covering them all season, it does not feel like they win 1 out of every 3 games. They have been atrocious since the end of November. They went 500 in November. I think that was undersold. But anyway, if you extrapolate that out to an 82-game season, that's 26 1/3 win. So 26-27, whatever you want to put that at, right? Currently, the teams in 8th, 9th, 10th, all tied in the inverse standings. I keep not having a good phrase for it. Have 25 wins, right? Like if they win 2 games, and the Pacers just keep winning at their current rate, they're not going to get outside of the top 7. I think people are fearful of wins, and I get it. Like every spot kind of matters when you get out of the top 4. Like they lose 5% chance at the top 4 just by going to 6th, and they lose another 6% if they go to 7th. Like, yeah, that matters, sure, but it's hard for them to get to 8. They can't move that much because of how bad their season has been and because of how few games are left. I think that part is kind of under discussed. Is it's only like 19, 18 games left for a lot of these teams. Like seismic standings changes are pretty tough at this point.
Yeah, they banked a lot of good losses early. That the way the schedule worked out for them this year, where it was a tougher start and then kind of a softer back end post trade deadline, ended up kind of forced their hand on the moves they did make and kind of sort of ended whatever competitive chance they had going into the season. But it does kind of afford them now a chance to hang on to that top end of the lottery, which for the long term franchise health is clearly what they should be trying to do. I know it's hard to try to lose games, and that's not what I don't think they're trying necessarily. I think they're just managing to do it against incredible odds sometimes, including against the Magic the other night. It's really quite something. But yeah, so I think you're dead on. Like I think that's probably the floor, is about that 7 range. And I think if I was betting, I would say they have I mean, the way they're playing right now, I think they have actually kind of a shot to be up in that top 4, like the 4 to 5 slot, and that's a great spot to be in for them for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because all season, even when they were trying to be good at the beginning of the year and they had a lot of healthy team, again, they went 500 in November. Like their schedule was hard and they were still okay after their 1-6 October. But anyway, they lost all these close games and now everyone's like, haha, that's strategic. They're doing it on purpose. Like, no. They sucked in these games even when they were trying to be good. They've just had a nightmare season in so many ways. And, now they're 5th to last and clearly they're rebuilding the rest of the season. The trade deadline completely makes that obvious. But the other factor, I think, here with their pick specifically, and I want to talk about the Cavs and the Rockets as well as a part of this, is, OKC is 1 game away from them right now. They both have 42 losses, but the Pacers have 2 more wins. 6th is the Kings, and 7th is the Spurs in the inverse standings, right? And the Kings, as we all know, just traded for Sabonis and Justin Holiday and Jeremy Lamb, right? Like, they're the Kings, so they stink and they lose all the time, but they're trying. Like they want to make the plan. They're 3 games out, which is a lot. Like I said, there's only 20 games left, but they want to get there, and it's not impossible that they get there. They have the same record over the last 10 games as the team tied for 10th right now in Portland, and they're at they are right there. Really, I mean, they're probably not going to make it, but they're going to try. They wouldn't have traded versus bonus to not try. And the Spurs have never, ever, ever not tried to win ever, and that's Greg Popovich's team. And they, like the Kings, are only 2 games out over there in the West from the play-in, and do I think they'll – or 1.5 games out. So do I think either of those teams will make it? No. But both of their franchises, given Popovich's history for all of time and given that the Kings want to play 1 meaningful game for the first time since I was 9 years old, I mean, they're going to try. So, yeah, the Pacers are only, 2 games ahead of the Kings in the inverse standings and 3.5 ahead of the Spurs. But that is another factor that makes me think falling to, like, maybe they get to 6 if they have like a hot run or they really figure out and click with Halbert and Brogdon, sure. But I think it's gonna be really hard for them to drop out of like the top 5-6 range.
Yeah, and I think I heard you. I think you heard you talk the other day about how organizations tank, right? Like coaches and players don't tank necessarily. That's what I've read, and I think where that manifests in situations like this is, it's players on the court are trying to win every game, right? But what happens is maybe you have a guy who's like 80 to 90% healthy for a night on a team that's trying to win games like the Kings. They're going to be in there playing versus a team like the Pacers. Right. It's like, hey, why push it? You're not going to send Malcolm Brogdon out there on a back-to-back in a season where it's done, right? So I think and when the margins are that thin and teams are that close in the standings for, the reverse standings, I guess, it's like that can make a real difference down the stretch for sure.
So the other factor is just catching OKC then, because like you said earlier, the top 3 have 15 wins, and I did the exercise with the Pacers wins. Okay, they win 1 out of 3. Those teams win like 1 out of 4, so they're probably going to win like 20 to 21. Pacers have 21 wins right now. Like getting to the top 3, out of the question to me. Like there's no way they're catching any of those teams. OKC's a maybe. They're 19 and 42. It's possible, I suppose, the Thunder just beat the Pacers, ironically, but that if you're asking me who's going to lose more games, Sam Presti or the Pacers the rest of the season. Like, yeah, I think that's the race to watch because, again, the Kings and Spurs are trying. The top 3 is unattainable. But the Thunder, I suppose it's possible the Pacers could jump up to 4. They were there for like 1 day, I think, early in February. But, again, if you're asking me who's going to win a tank-off between Sam Presti and Herb Simon. I think I know I'm going to pick there. So that when I look at the inverse standings and what the Pacers should watch the rest of the season, basically it comes down to me. How long do the Kings keep trying? And when do the Thunder start to say, oh, Josh Giddey's left pinky toe has a scar on? I don't know. We've all seen what the Thunder do. But like that, those are the two races. It's because the Spurs are never going to stop trying. So it's the Kings and the Thunder to me.
Yep, I'm with you on that. That Thunder loss was incredible. It's shocking that managed, and then backing that up with the Magic loss too earlier this week. That's just really I it's weird to be happy for losing games as a Pacers. I've never been in the situation as a Pacers fan. Really, I don't think. Maybe the Paul George year, I suppose, where he was hurt and they could have maybe jumped up in the lottery. But like I think they can hang in there, and I don't know if they're going to be able to catch the Thunder. Like that would take probably a few injuries, which I don't. That's the one thing I think as a Pacers fan right now. Like if they're losing games, that's fine. I want that to happen. Basically at this point, it doesn't really matter. Long term, it's good. The thing that would happen maybe if they catch them by virtue of Tyrese Halliburton or someone like that suffering a severe injury, that's not good. I would.
Right.
That's the side of it that you don't want to pull for. Like that's if that happened, that would maybe be a net negative, but. Like I think they're going to be right in it with them down the stretch. I do think that the Thunder's, I haven't looked actually at the Thunder's remaining schedule. I don't actually know if they have a harder schedule than the Pacers do down the stretch, but I think that 4-5 slot, I would bet on 5 right now. I think they can hang into 5th. I think that is a good spot to be in. I know it's still outside maybe that top tier of players in the draft, but the way the lottery odds are flattened now, you have a much better chance maybe of like jumping up a little bit or hanging in that spot. I think it's still a good spot to be in for them for sure.
Yeah, it's tough. And the hard part for me is my strong aversion to tanking as a concept in sports. I hate it. I hate that this is a thing that is rewarded. So it's going to be weird for me to cover like this so obviously smart thing for the Pacers to do that I think is just so objectively wrong with sports.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you had to go
know.
from, hating speculating about the trade deadline ahead of time to jumping right into hating speculating about tanking. It's really a great season for you specifically.
It's just weird after every loss because I'm always like, oh, what'd they do wrong? Blah, blah, blah. And then all these fans on Twitter and my mentions are like, yay! I'm like, wait, you're a fan of the team. I get it. It's just weird. It's weird.
Well, that's what's been most impressive, I think, is they've actually managed to do it in ways where, like, I'll watch a Pacers game, I will have a great time watching 3 quarters of entertaining basketball, and then it'll be a close, fun game. The Pacers might be up a couple heading into the 4th against a better team or another competent, comparable team, and then they'll find a way to blow it down the stretch at the end. I'm like, man, I actually had a good time watching this game for about an hour and 40 minutes, and in the end, it's the best result. It's really managed to be quite something. Like, the Lance hitting the 3 to force overtime, and then going 0 for 5 in overtime was maybe the best possible example of that dichotomy where like fantastic fun moment. We'll remember that for a long time. And then they lost anyway. So that was like a peak 2021 Pacers night, I think.
Toss the Magic game out the window too. I mean, don't actually because they sucked in that game. But like every game since they made the big trade has been like they're within 10 and close the whole game and then they lose. Besides beating the Celtics. So that is how it's kind of been. It's been fun for fans. The last factor here to me, Kings have the 8th hardest schedule left. This is all per Tankathon, who just does inverse of your opponent winning percentage. So back-to-backs aren't included here, and like who's going to be resting guys at the end is not included. But Kings have the 8th hardest schedule left. Thunder have the 10th hardest schedule left. Spurs are at 23rd. Pacers at 26th, 5th easiest actually, which makes sense given how hard their early season schedule was. So that could, in theory, push the Pacers to maybe that Kings Spurs tier. But again, I think that given the win percentage of these teams the rest of the season, it's super unlikely that things change. Hey guys, let's take one short little break here to talk about the good folks over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is an award-winning daily fantasy app making daily fantasy easy. It's super easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times any entry you do. It's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy, and PrizePicks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. You can use their award-winning app on the App Store and Google Play. Any prop you can think of, they've got it. Points scored, rebounds, steals, whatever basketball player you can choose, they'll have it up there. They have mixed sport entries, more than NBA, NFL, MLB if they ever come back, soccer, MMA, and more for a limited time. PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our listeners. You get $50 for free If a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, you got to use the code NBA when you sign up to get that. That's right, an exclusive offer for Locked On fans. Sign up with the code NBA for $50 for free if your entry scores a single point. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. There is another sect of the standings that matters to the Pacers, and it's the Cavs, who the Pacers own their first-round pick, which has kind of been talked about a little too loosey-goosey to me as the season has progressed. The Cavs are only 2.5 games ahead of the play-in. Now, again, like we just talked about, 2.5 games is a lot with this point in the season. The team in 7th is Toronto, who is good, but also is somewhat inconsistent because they play a lot of young guys. And in 8th is the Nets, who the Cavs are 4.5 ahead of, which is a pretty big, again, this late the season's a pretty big gap. Darius Garland is questionable to return in the next game. That will make the Cavs already immediately good. So I think it's pretty likely, especially because the Cavs have about an average schedule left, that the Cavs make the playoffs. But that is the second most important team to watch in the standings for the Pacers, because the Cavs, beyond making the playoffs, so the best case scenario for the Pacers is somehow the Cavs lose literally every game they play the rest of the season. They have 36 wins. They're the 10 seed. And then they make the playoffs from there. And then the Pacers would get the 15th pick. That's completely unrealistic to think about. The realistic best case scenario is they're 6th in the East, because then they're for sure in, and the Pacers get the pick guaranteed. So from that, guys, what the Pacers would be looking for the Cavs is be the worst team in this bunch of, currently Boston, Cleveland, Dallas, and Denver all have 36 wins, and the Bucks and the Sixers have 37. And then Toronto is the next team above that with 33, and the Pacers don't want the Cavs to get to that area because then they're playing. So the key for the Cavs and from a Pacers perspective is they want them to finish 19th, right above that group, and then have nothing else change in the standings. Maybe Minnesota goes on a hot run or something like that, but that would be the idea for the Pacers. So like beating Boston like they did Sunday helps the Cavs make the playoffs, which like in theory helps them keep the pick, but also could make that pick one slot worse. So like those games are the weird ones to matter. It's like you kind of want to root for the Cavs, but not to be too good. It's a weird spot for the Pacers.
It's a weird spot for anyone. It's a weird spot for me thinking about that as you laid that all out. And I think you laid it out as well as it could be laid out, and I'm still lost basically. Like it's a definitely a weird spot. I know that the good thing, I guess, is at that end of at the first round, it matters a little less, like slot by slot. It does matter, like it's important, but it's a little less than like the tier at the top end of the race. But it's also there's so many factors, Tony. Like it's impossible to like try to track all of that. Like it's who really knows at any given time. Like I feel like that is the kind of thing I feel maybe at the end of the regular season where the scenarios become a little more like locked in and clear. It's a little easier to follow. But yeah, it's definitely the other variable to keep track of. It's LeVert getting hurt and missing some time here has actually been weird in the way that it affects the Pacers still. Like we're still worrying about Karis LeVert's health in some ways. Like that's always kind of fun now that he's still gone. But yeah, it's so it's tough to track. Do you think the Cavs have like where do you think they'll end up? Like they've kind of been leaking a little oil here, it feels like lately, but they're still a talented team.
Yeah, they just hung tough with Minnesota without Garland. They beat the Wizards without him, and they lost to the Pistons without him, which was a really that's one of those ones where for the Pacers you're like, okay, they lost, that's good, their pick moves up, but also like, guys, please make the playoffs. Like,
yeah, exactly.
We want to keep so it's lottery protected this year and next year. And then it becomes 2 seconds. Like exceedingly likely the Pacers get a first from that, but not 100%. They would like to get it. So I think the Cavs do make the playoffs. I mean, they have a big enough cushion to make it, but like the Pacers play the Nets the last game of the season. Like it's not insane to me that like that is the difference between pushing the Nets to playing the Cavs in the playoffs or something. Like that kind of margin could matter. So the Cavs is an interesting one. From a Pacers perspective, they play the Cavs on March 8th. So, like, those games are weird because the Pacers, if they beat the Cavs, make that pick better, but make their own pick worse. That's strange. The Pacers also play the Nuggets on March 30th. And then 2 nights later, the Celtics, who both have the same number of wins as the Cavs. The Pacers really don't want to win those games conceptually, right? Like, they really don't want to win those. So, that's another weird part of standings watch for the Pacers is, like, making sure the Cavs pick ends up in the best situation possible. Again, this one's different than the Pacers one, where like, as someone who hates the concept of taking, in the Pacers ethos of time that I have covered them and followed them because I've lived in Indy my whole life, I can't remember for decades the last time they've controlled a pick like this, where fans of the team will be rooting against another franchise like this. And there's two of them. We haven't even gotten to the Rockets yet. So it's going to be weird how they kind of focus on what they can do with the Cavs pick and how they, if they can, to any extent, kind of game it to be the best it can, while also hoping that the Cavs do their part and make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's almost impossible to try to control any of that. Like it's Pacers fans really haven't been here before. Like I've never really had to be like someone who considers the variable of we want it to be better, but not too much better that it actually hurts. Like it's fascinating to like be on that end of the equation this season. But I hope it all works out. I feel like the Pacers are due. I feel like when you go that many decades without picking inside the top 10, like I think maybe you're due for a little luck on that side. Like just from basketball competition karma.
Right. Yeah, and look, this is probably not going to happen, but just hypothetically pretending they have another similar run like they have from 1989 till this season of not picking in the top 10, right? So it's been 33 years. They're like, if you were born in 1989 on draft day, like you could be 66 years old and the Pacers have picked one time in the top 10 your whole life. Like that's crazy to think about. So obviously that's a stretch of crazy sports fan fiction that would never happen, but it's like that is the scope of how important this theoretically is a draft for the Pacers, and that's why focusing on this cap pick matters. And the last one, I mentioned it a little earlier. This one is as straightforward as it gets. The Rockets, they have their second round pick. The Rockets currently have the third worst record in the league, although they have tied for the least wins at 15, and they've played less games than Detroit and Orlando. So it's possible that when they've played the same amount of games as those teams, they end up with the worst record. And then the Pacers would get the 31st pick in the second round. This one is easy. I don't have to talk about other teams that much. The Pacers want the Rockets to lose every game they play the rest of the season. Doesn't matter what happens around them in the standings. No playoff games. There is a Rockets-Pacers game. That one will be a conundrum on the 18th because the Pacers have their own first-round pick to worry about, also their own second-round pick. I guess you could call it a win-win, but that one's pretty straightforward. If you're a fan of the Pacers, you would like the Rockets to be completely horrible the rest of the season.
Yeah, and as we saw last year in the draft, like that pick getting as close as possible to the first round really increases the value and lets you make maybe a potential move for someone like they did for Isaiah Jackson. Like the higher that gets, the more other teams treat it as that kind of asset. So that's why it's so important.
Yeah, and the thing about the 31st pick in particular is, if you draft someone in the first round, we're going to get a little nerdy on contracts here. They're no matter what, they're subject to the rookie scale. First pick of the second round, you can do whatever you want, right? You can give them a shorter deal, a longer deal, start at whatever number you want. And a lot of teams have kind of defaulted with these 31st picks to like a fake rookie scale deal. But for some teams, that actually is kind of helpful to have the flexibility to sign that guy using different resources. And the rookie scale just is default helpful. But sometimes 31 can have value to teams in that way. So also, they can use it, like you said, to do Aaron Holiday plus they had 31 last year. They got it in a string of trades. Aaron Holiday plus 31 got them Isaiah Jackson. Okay, what's 31 plus, future stuff? 31 plus Goga, 31, something like that, again, to move up again. So it's not impossible that they do something like that again and then end up with 3 picks, but that becomes more valuable if the Rockets stink. So that is the last standings watch. To me, unless I miss something, for the Pacers is how bad are the Rockets? And theirs is easy. They have the least wins in the league. They're currently losing by, they're winning. They're beating the Clippers right now. So if you check NBA scores because you're listening to this tomorrow, perhaps they are no longer the worst record in the league. But I think those are the 3 teams that really matter. And then with the Cavs, you're kind of watching a lot of the middle of the East as a fan of the Pacers.
Yep, absolutely. I agree fully with that. And yeah, 31 plus wherever the Cavs pick ends up, if it's like 22 plus 5 is the kind of package that would maybe let you get up to like 4, for example. Like just throwing that out there, as a possibility.
It would
not
take
just
one of the,
way too far ahead. And obviously there'd be probably more involved, but
it takes one of those, this team thinks it's a 5-team draft and the Pacers think it's a 4-team draft. And look, I guarantee, maybe not guarantee because sometimes things changes, but Pritchard will hit us with the we think it's a 4-team draft, maybe the 5th pick, whatever quote this year. So maybe they'll try to move up again. So there's a lot of interest. This is never a situation the Pacers are in. Never. Like talking like this about how they monitor the rest of the season and how fans root for games that the Pacers aren't even involved in the rest of the season is not something that, again, has ever. I don't even think in the time I've understood sports enough to watch standings, I have ever had to think this way for the team and what they're thinking about. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this all shakes out. But the best case scenario in theory is, obviously their lottery pick is 1. So the best case scenario would be 115-31, but that would require sweating out the Cavs in the play-in tournament, lottery luck, and the Rockets being atrocious the rest of the season. None of those are impossible, but all stuff that the Pacers would like to go a little smoother than that.
Yeah.
We have one more topic today. Actual basketball, not standings. Fun stuff to talk about for me. Fans are clicking away because I'm no longer talking about the lottery. One more quick little break before we talk about Chris Duarte so I can tell you about the good folks over at Built Bar who are making the best tasting protein bars ever that make it easy to stick to your New Year's resolution. If you're like me and you're in March, you've kind of drifted away from it, but Built Bar can help you get back on track. They make the best tasting protein bars ever that are 100% covered in chocolate, come in a ton of delicious flavors, and are perfect for everyone for a ton of scenarios. Tons of listeners have told me that they've tried them and loved them. I love the peanut butter brownie flavor. The cookie dough is really good. What makes Built Bar so great is they taste like a candy bar. They're actually good. A lot of protein bars are, quite frankly, gross, but they're actually good. 100% covered in chocolate, but they come in a ton of flavors. That means there's something for everybody. If you like fruit flavors, marshmallow infused flavors, sweet flavors, they've got it all for you. They're all low calorie and high protein. You can see all the macros straight on their website. They have a nice little chart. It's really impressive. You can replace candy bars with them. You can use them for a meal. You can use them as a snack. Really, you've just got to try them. Go to built.com, see everything they could have for you, and try one today. If you use the code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your order. That promo code, again, is LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Chris Duarte, he's questionable to play against the Magic tonight, first of all, with that toe injury that he came out of the game on Monday for. So who knows if he even plays in this specific game. Carlisle alluded that he could be back later in the week, post-game Monday, so perhaps he still returns in due time. Bench returning from the break. He is coming off the bench behind Buddy Hield at the 3. And as I talked about on yesterday's show, Buddy Hield's made the Pacers offense like insanely good numerically. Off the charts, bonkers good. But the long-term future of the Pacers probably contains some form of Halliburton plus Duarte playing at least somewhat often together. So I'm torn on how I feel about Chris Duarte coming off the bench. And as it's been all season, it's sort of the same thought points. If he comes off the bench, he gets more touches and gets more shots and is going against worse players, which is not necessarily good, but it's not bad. It's a way for him to refine his craft on an NBA floor with the ball more often because with the starters, Brogdon and Halliburton have the ball more. There are other threats like Buddy Hield and Isaiah Jackson who can be a lob threat. And O'Shea Brissett suddenly looks awesome. There are other threats to share the ball with, whereas with the bench, it's much more straightforward that he can get his touches. So I'm receptive to that. Putting him with the bench lets him grow and get those reps. But one, again, his future with the Pacers probably involves him playing with Halliburton a lot. Why not get those reps? And two, you're just putting him in a lineup that you, in theory, think he's going to be in, even beyond reps with Halliburton. Just like if you think he's going to be a starter one day, play him with starters, play him against the guys he'll be defending for that growth point. So I'm kind of, this is lame, but like I kind of get both. But I'm curious if you think there's a better one, and I kind of think there's a better one, but I'm curious what you think here.
Yeah, I think the other factor is that they could be trying to, showcase Buddy Hield a little bit and see what he can do either for themselves long term or what they want to do with him in the offseason. For Duarte's development personally, though, I agree with you in that if you start Duarte, Halliburton, and Brogdon 1 through 3, and I think they can all play together. I think Brogdon and Duarte can both guard threes, whatever positions are now. And if anything, that might be a better spot for Brogdon to guard opposing like wing players more than like opposing guards. But it gives you 3 ball handlers on the floor at the same time, which is good, but it also means of those 3, Duarte is probably doing the least amount of that ball handling and decision making in pick and roll or whatever you want to get him reps doing. And so I think you can definitely see the case for bringing him off the bench. Plus, Hield's a veteran, like you're bringing him in, like Duarte is a rookie. I know that doesn't really matter that much, and he's older for a rookie, but there's still a slight. You can maybe see where it's easier to sell Duarte on coming off the bench right now for the rest of the season, telling him you're going to get him those minutes and touches like with the ball in his hands off the bench in that role versus maybe someone like Hield who would be a little less receptive to accepting that role. And so I think there's that to consider as well. But Duarte, I actually kind of like him more off the bench because of that. And I think I like being able to see him get him on the floor, get him the same minutes possible. He's going to get more touches. He's going to be doing more of the things with the ball in his hands and even like off ball and even like defensively guarding maybe like a different position than he would otherwise. It gives him more of an opportunity like get reps doing what you want to see him doing. And I and I also so yeah, that's where I'm at with it. I'll stop right there before I talk myself in another circle. But yeah, like I
There's
think
a lot.
I don't mind him doing that. I guess. Do you have a preference between those two though? Like it's
So my preference now, if I'm the Pacers, is I want the reps, I think, because I just think that's a better way to grow. We've talked about with Goga and Aaron Holiday and TJ Leaf, even guys who didn't pan out, but just they needed more opportunity forever, and just sticking them in there in either non-consequential moments or where they're just running the floor up and down and not impacting the game that much. Like, yeah, they get better. Like playing in the game helps, but the reps are more important to me. And this stat is why I choose bench. Okay, with all three of Brogdon, Halliburton, Duarte on. So first of all, super small sample size. We're talking about 6 minutes of basketball right now. So I am totally blowing this out of proportion. Even I admit that. But first of all, Pacers have won. Pacers have won those minutes by 4 points. So maybe that lineup is something to monitor going forward. In those minutes, though, Chris Duarte's usage rate 7.7%. That is like ghastly low, right? Like that is stunning. So that stops me and goes, whoa, that is so low. And I get why, Duarte's finishing plays, Brogdon's initiating, and in those units, they also had Jalen Smith in there shooting threes. O'Shea Brissett's been playing well, Isaiah Jackson's playing well. Like I talked about, there are reasons why that's the case. Okay, whatever, that's fine. But that is a shockingly low number for Duarte, and I think that's too low, and that needs to be higher. Versus, this is all season, by the way, so like even Halliburton was off the team. But when Duarte plays without either of those guys, his usage is 22%, which is like a pretty normal number. But a 15% difference is a lot in 100 possessions. Like that's like 4 touches a game or 4 finishing possessions a game, maybe 3. So that's a lot of junky numbers and words to say. I think I would prefer, if I'm in charge of the Pacers, if I'm Rick Carlisle for a day, I would keep him with the bench for the touches. But if I did want to start him more, I would definitely have to have him have the ball more than he does now when he plays with Brogdon and Halliburton, which is really hard to do because those two guys also require touches to be effective and run the Pacers offense. So that's why I choose the second unit. But I understand why growing that unit that I talked about has, it's only 6 minutes again, but has been successful. And you want to see what that can be in the future. It also has a lot of value.
yeah. Plus, getting those that look now ahead of the offseason, like to see how he pairs with Brogdon and Halliburton specifically, considering what they might be looking to do with the roster going into next year, is also really valuable. And it's also been really hard to get those guys healthy at the same time to even get a look at that.
Right.
And I know we can imagine what it looks like, but I think like it's really easy though with that starting unit for like Duarte's best role maybe with Halliburton and Brogdon on the court is to kind of just be like a floor spacing shooter at that point. And I think if you're bringing him off the bench, he's pretty much always at least going to be the secondary ball handler, like a secondary creator. And so I think in that spot, you kind of it's the best mix of both positives, I guess. You're seeing what he can do with more reps and touches. You're also seeing him play with either Brogdon or Halliburton, which is valuable. And maybe you can close lineups sometimes if he's healthy, overhealed for defensive purposes anyway. And you're kind of getting that look at that unit down the stretch. So I do tend to value the bench looks at this point. But yeah, I mean, if they start him and ran more for him in that set, like I would be interested in that too, though. So I can definitely see both sides. But
yeah, we are commentating on sports. We're not allowed to do the both sides. We have to pick something strongly. We have to say this guy's a bum if he can't fit with these guys. No.
Yeah, we have to embrace debate, Tony, for sure.
We do have to embrace. We have to manufacture opinions we don't
Yes.
even believe in to be on television. So I agree with all that, and we haven't even said this, but like, yeah, the closing games part is different than starting versus the bench. Like, I think he should close no matter what. If he starts
Yes.
or doesn't, just that is the most important reps, crunch time in an NBA game. The Buddy Hield part you brought up, I didn't even have this in like my outline of stuff to bring up in this section, but yeah, that's a good point too. Like, who knows how much they really value him in the future at this point. I would say it seems like Rick Carlisle really likes him, and he's been really helpful for this team. So if they're being serious, again, we'll find out this summer. Actions speak louder than words, always with teams. If they really do want to be good next year, and Rick Carlisle's being honest in his praise of Buddy Hield, perhaps he could be back, and his impact on their offense has been unbelievable since he got here. Unbelievable. So if they do plan on keeping him, honestly, maybe they'd want to try him in other roles, but featuring him is certainly a factor that I had not considered as an advantage of starting him if they do want to maybe move him. this summer. Clearly, there was interest from the Lakers this past summer, right? Like teams still do want him. There is a situation where he's helpful to other teams, especially contending teams. So I'll be curious what his future is. But yeah, featuring him certainly is a factor in this decision as well that I hadn't really thought about. And maybe that makes me even turn a little more towards Duarte with the bench. So that was a good addendum.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. I also wanted to run this by you. Like, how crazy am I for this? I just thought about this. Hadn't considered it before. Could we see a lineup this season, since the games don't really matter that much, with like 1 through 4, whatever those positions look like, of Halliburton, Brogdon, Duarte, and Hield, and just see what that looks like against a small ball lineup? Like,
go for it.
I feel like Duarte and Brogdon both have the ability to maybe size up a little bit and guard, modern NBA fours in certain spots. Like, I think that would kind of be interesting to I just want to see it, basically. The basketball nerd in me who loves shooting as much as I do really wants to see all those guys together now. And now that I thought of it, if it doesn't happen, I'm going to be very sad. So, like, I've kind of like disappointed myself preemptively, but you never know.
I'm stealing this phrase from someone else again, and I have narrowed it down to 2 people, but I can't remember who it was, and I'm too lazy to figure it out. But again, it's not wins and losses; it's wins and lessons. And trying that lineup would be a lesson. You would learn if, oh wow, holy cow, these 4 guards kick butt, and maybe we could play O'Shea Brissett at center with those 4. Now we have this really small, versatile group, blah blah blah. Or maybe it just totally sucks because Buddy Hield is a worthless defender sometimes. And you're like, okay, we'll never try it again. Why not? Yeah, that's a good idea. But the problem they have is they kind of already are in a front court logjam where they're like, okay, how do we get Brissett and Jalen Smith and Jackson and go get in the game? So I would agree with you that I would like to see that unit, but it's going to be extremely tough in practice.
Yeah, not starting necessarily, but if you just give me like 5 minutes at the end of a first quarter or something sometime, we'll see how it goes.
That would be a very fun unit. It might require an injury for Rick to actually go to that, but that would be interesting, especially for Duarte, just to see how maybe like if he's defending a 4, how that would fit.
Yep.
Jay, you've been very gracious with your time. Thank you very much. You are not in your own abode. You are, I'm stealing you from family time. So I apologize for going over the normal allotment of my time. Thank you very much. Where can people follow you and all your work?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at Jay Rigdon 5, the number 5, and I write pretty much every day in the week at Awful Announcing, and I've written at the Fried Egg and the Golfer's Journal if you like golf, into that as well. And yeah, happy to be here, Tony. Thank you so much for having me too.
I really enjoy golf. I also completely suck. just an awful golfer, which I suppose makes me the most average person ever.
It's a universal experience for sure.
It very much is. But the problem is I have friends who are good. So that makes golf a little harder for me to get involved in because they're like, do we invite Tony or the round will take like 20 minutes longer. So my love and hate for golf both runs deep. Thank you everybody for listening. Tomorrow we'll of course be talking what happened in Pacers Magic round 2, any themes we learned from that game and what to watch for going forward this season. As again, I'm going to hammer this into every listener's head for the rest of the season. Wins and lessons. I want someone to tweet it at me so I know the people are listening. Thank you all for listening, everybody. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.